Hello, folks. Hope you're well. If you are loving the podcast, long-term fan, you've maybe been listening to a few episodes and like it, please make sure that you're subscribing to my Sunday Thoughts email newsletter that I send every Sunday. I give some perspective on self-improvement, and it's just some nice thoughts on a calming day. Also, if you're loving the podcast, I do a paid subscription of 99p a month where you get an extra episode on a Friday, which is a little bit more personal, and obviously a bonus episode, and any exclusive first access to any projects that I'm working on as well. So, if you want to do that, go for it. Otherwise, enjoy the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Self-Improvement Project. I hope everybody is well. Personally, it's been probably the longest time since starting this that I've spent without sitting down and recording an episode for you. I've been away on holiday for a week. If you are part of my Sunday email, you will have seen some of the lovely pictures of the Spanish sun whilst I was away. And as I've talked about before, that rest, recovery, break can be so key at regular intervals as well. So I hope you have been well. This episode is probably about half an hour from publishing. So as soon as it hits your ears, if you're one of the first listeners on a Monday, it will be fresh for you. Now, today's episode comes from a little bit of introspection, a little bit of solitude that I've had to reflect upon and think about what matters right now, what is going to resonate with you, that whether you are at the start of, in the middle of, or at a similar stage or similar time, that there's some lessons here that you can use to your advantage for perspective. So I've titled this episode 3 Lessons from the Last 3 Years. This 3-year mark comes from the start of the podcast. I did that episode with my friend Dan the other week about that, where we discussed just thoughts, maybe a little bit of reflection, but going off into tangents around different areas of self-improvement. And I thought, having sat down every week for the last 3 years, combined with self-improvement, what are some things that would be useful for you right now? So I've put together 3 of the most profound lessons that I've had and wanted to package them up for you so that you can use them as and when, like I said before, there is this timing element which is so key. I love the idea around reading a book at the right time of your life, for instance. So hopefully these 3 lessons resonate somewhat with you, or they'll be a form of nostalgia when you need them. So the first lesson here is, when you have your values, your purpose becomes clearer. So the first lesson is, when you have your values, your purpose becomes clearer. What do I mean by this? I've done episodes on values before. I've done episodes on purpose before. Purpose is one of these elusive things that we think is tangible, but it's not. It's an experience. It's not an object. It's not a destination. It is genuinely something that will continue. And one of the purest things in life is following that path of purpose and utilizing it throughout your life. There is nothing worse than feeling lost because you don't know what you're doing. Of course, we're allowed to not know what we're doing from a task point of view and problem solving as we go, but feeling lost in that can be it can make you feel despondent. Now, where this lesson comes from, we actually need to rewind back to the start of the journey of the self-improvement project, where COVID had hit. We were a few months into lockdown, into this stage that a lot of people hadn't ever lived through before from lockdown. And this is where the clarity of values, as well as time to process, time to align, created the podcast. I'd had previous experience. I had a passion to share insight into what I cared about, and that is a moment where I felt lost. I felt despondent. I felt that the purpose of what I was doing wasn't clear. But now, going through this process and journey, my purpose is clearer. My purpose around what I do each day and how I turn up comes through this project. It wasn't even an option. When your values become so clear that you want to share something with the world, you have to do it. It's not a yes or no decision. It is, I have to do this. I must follow this through. And values come from reflection. They come from experiences that you've had, as well as what you want to do. I heard I can't remember what producer it was, but he was talking about, a film producer was talking about, he was in his 80s and he felt like he didn't have enough time to achieve everything he wanted to achieve, and he's 80. When you go through life, you discover more things. You want to be more... You want to discover more. You realize how much you don't know. And he said that he heard a film producer say that when they were in their 80s, when he was 50. And he didn't really understand what they meant. And it shows that even later on in life, when you have your values, when you have your purpose, there is this finite side to what you're wanting to do. So I would probably challenge you here with this first lesson around, do you know what your values are? Do you know what you care about? Are you doing enough to discover those? Are you living your values enough to present opportunities to you that matter to you? Do you feel a bit lost with your purpose and feel you need to start something in order to feed that feeling of wholeness, of richness that you need in your life? So that's the first lesson from the last 3 years. The second lesson for you is there will always be downs in life. Nobody is exempt. And the skill here is not to avoid the lows. The skill is how to manage them. Ups and downs are purely perspective. You have the highs of new relationships. You have the highs of getting a job. You have the highs of achievements, accomplishments in education or in fitness. But with those come the lows, come the injuries, come the bad bosses, come the failures. The moments where we thought we would achieve and we don't. Now, like I say, this is unavoidable. You are not going to go through life without any failures. You're not going to manage to tiptoe avoid, in any stretch of the imagination, stop yourself from having downs. These lows are key for character building. They're key for lessons. I understand that. But we need to embrace is too positive a word, so we need to manage them. Time is one healer. The wonderful book, I May Be Wrong, by Bjorn Lindeblad, has a exceptional and simple phrase that helps with this. And it is as simple as, "This too shall pass." We forget about time when we're riding the highs of life. But when there are the lows and we feel down, we need to understand that this too shall pass. Whatever choices you are making, I talked about this the other week, you are choosing your pain, you are choosing your suffering. You need to understand what it is that you're suffering for. When you are suffering, you're having the down, the lows. Are you happy suffering for that? That compromise, that sacrifice? Allowing time to pass is a form of managing it. Not being your own worst self-critic. Going easy on yourself. An example of that right now was me beating myself up for not having an episode ready for you in more time than imminently. But I've been busy. I've been away. I've been resting. So I need to balance that perspective. When you have the self-critic, find your biggest fan. Find your biggest supporter. Find your best friend. What positive input can they put onto this around this being a lesson, around this passing, around that reassurance that this will be okay? But the lesson here is acknowledging that there will always be lows. It's how you manage them. It's not about avoiding them. And the last lesson for you all, the third and final lesson from the last 3 years of not just the podcast, but from living life, is that simpler living trumps all. Simpler living trumps all. Now, why does this matter? Why is this the last lesson? This is the last lesson because life goes quick. When we are living excessively, we are looking for pleasure, we are looking for the next best thing. We forget to live. We forget about the beauty of life. We forget about all of the things that make us whole, that make life rich. We need to go back to our roots. We need to go back to the things that make us happy to live life properly. And all of this comes back to living more simply. The easy route in life is to be led. It's to be led by everyone and everything. The materialistic side of things, of buying lots of things that are maybe trending or showing us a way to live. There is the social pressures of living, being surrounded by lots of people in your life creating expectations of how you should live. But it removes the wholeness. It removes the richness. It removes the pure essence of why we live. Simpler living removes expectation. Simpler living removes time spent thinking about things that don't matter. We need to remember that at this exact moment in time, whilst you're listening to this podcast, is the best time humanity has ever lived in. You are currently living in the best state that the human species has ever lived in. And this can be a blessing and a curse. The push of life will entice you. But it's your job to step back and realize the beauty that comes from simpler living. There will be times when you push, but it won't be from adding things to your life push. It'll be a push for purer things such as mastery, health, fitness. These are the things that money can't buy. You've got to remember that anybody can strive for greatness and become the best. But not everybody can be happy with the small and simple things in life. By creating pockets in your day of true simplicity and being able to enjoy them is a skill, it's an art, but it's also an absolute blessing to be able to live with that state of mind. So try and think around, how could you live more simply from today? Where does this lesson come from in the last 3 years? It comes from experience of, not myself, but of observation of how quick life goes and how all of these grand things that apparently make our lives better are actually not worth much at all. A common theme in this episode has been life going quickly. So make sure that by grabbing hold of these 3 lessons, that you make the most of them. Even when you're maybe bored with simpler living, or you're riding a high wave, or you feel like you don't need to think about your purpose. Take a step back to think about how lucky you are, how there's so much choice and opportunity ahead of you to continue to mould and chisel this wonderful life that you have. Otherwise, guys, thank you very much for listening. Please let me know your thoughts, any other lessons that you would maybe have based on top of those that I've shared with you, or just any general thoughts about the points that I've made and how they relate to you in your life. I'm always free to chat on email, so reach out to me. Otherwise, I will see you all next time. Cheers.